Hello, this is Gailferris, your narrator, and I'm going to take you on a trip to Upernavik, Greenland. I flew via helicopter to Upernavik. Here is a map that shows the general overview of my paddle from Upernavik down into the bottom of Laksefjord, where there is a forest of trees called Orpit, and the trees are 2 meters or 6 feet high. This forest of willows that are 6 feet high is the only such forest for thousands of miles around. It is a glacial refugium. Flying via helicopter, this is an overview of the general area where I am paddling. And this is the topography up on top. I didn't hike in this area, but just to show you the type of rocks and topology. Salmon Fjord was very exciting. This is uplifted glaciated land, and you can see it has a very, very dramatic drop-off. I was quite aware of this as a kayak paddler. The issues always in mind were, where can I come in for a landing place? This is an overview of the entrance area to Laksefjord, the type of topography. In this view, winding off to the right behind these rocks is the actual entrance of that fjord. And it was just an incredible place to be wandering around. Here, as I am paddling down into Laksefjord, the water is first turquoise, and then it is gradually turning more and more powdery white due to all of the rock flour that is being fed into this fjord from the glacier at its base. I'm showing you a close-up of these rocks as I am gliding by. In among these rocks are these complex little terraces just festooned with whatever can establish itself. And the dirt is very rich, as you can see, because it's really filled with plants, each one of these little hanging gardens. I'm making my way up the fjord toward its headwaters. The water is becoming quite chalky. That's typical of water coming down from a glacier, and the salinity is dropping. Just never know what you're going to see when you're visiting places like this. The water is surprisingly chalky. You can see it's really very gray. I am 3/4 of the way, or about 20 miles. Far reaches of Laksefjord. In this area, it is a microclimate. It's much warmer than the outside. Because it's much warmer, this morning we have quite a big population of mosquitoes. However, so I'm having breakfast outside to make life a little more comfortable, because the interior of my tent seems to have a few visitors inside, because it's a little annoying to have to deal with so many. The solar battery regenerator over here is working. It's charging up one of my batteries. At long last I found fern, because where we are is a glacial refugium. It's 72 degrees north. But we're in Laksefjord, which is interesting, unique microclimate. And they like to grow in these very protected little regions in the rocks. In this same region, there are willow trees that are now showing 2.5 feet in height. Interesting area. Birch grows here profusely, but it doesn't grow quite that tall. This is the tallest birch. It's approaching 3 feet actually, right here. So you can see how things grow quite well in these protected areas. I have arrived at this point, which is the side of, here we are at the willow forest. Warm air is coming down here because of the configuration of the land. Forests of trees, willows, and then what else? They're reported to be at 2 meters high. And from this point, it looks like that may be possible. It's an interesting area with a sort of basaltic backdrop, kind of trap rock type of rock up there, which appears to me to be possibly a source of nutrients to these trees down here, because there's a water coming down from there, and it seems to collect right in this little delta here, where all these trees have great size. It's quite unusual. Right now I'm in the forest, and I'm standing next to a tree that's about 2 meters, and it's a long way to go to get some shade, I must say. I've been battling for 4 days since I left Upernavik. This picture shows for proportion the video camera with the basaltic mountain behind. Next is a picture of myself in my Ruka vinyl dry suit, and it was really hot down there. I only stayed for half an hour. I couldn't stand it. It was so hot. Here's a close-up of the 3-foot-high birch trees that were growing to the outside of the delta, which was filled with all of the salix trees. I was quite curious about why there was such a heavy layer of humus or peat material in this area, and why these plants could grow so large. I felt that they must be heavily enriched by the rock strata above them. The purpose of this picture is to illustrate beneath the birch how black and rich the soil is, even though it has been washed out by high storm surge waves. This is a red willow, the Salix arctica, and this is one of the 2 willows which has grown to 6 feet tall or 2 meters in this delta area. Here is the other willow, Salix glauca, or white willow, that also grows to 2 meters tall. It's fun to look at these close up. The major difference between these 2 willows is in the appearance of the catkins. Among the bases of these willow trees were large lichens, and their thalluses were 2 and 3 inches across in diameter. Growing among them were flowering vascular plants, quite a contrast to the lichens. Because the physical portions of these plants are so much smaller than the sheer mass of these lichens. In the middle of this picture is a tiny stellaria, and around it is a polygonium. Next is a cerastrum. Now is a cochlearia, which is in the mustard family and is edible. It's a fleshy plant. Here is a very small version of a ranuncula, a member of the buttercup family, which likes moist ground. This is bladdercampion, which is also common in New England in a larger form. This was the forest that we were just visiting a minute ago. What is happening with our prevailing wind? Coming, actually, from over here, is that the wind gets a lot of warmth from the peaks in this fjord. So by the time it gets here, it's gained quite a few, just a little bit of warmth. That helps to maintain this forest of trees here. And I think that's also one of the factors. The dark rocks in the area. And I think these are the source of nutrients. And in the foreground is some gooky clay, which I walked in. And some of these rocks are a little bit flinty. saw some very filamentous green algae in the water, the fresh water coming down into this delta, which implies alkaline soil. It is interesting that once you're out of the delta, off to the side here, the dominant species of tree looks to me like it's birch. There's more birches here. There's absolutely none in that delta of willows. The height of these birch are not particularly unusual. Maybe a couple feet high, but that's about it. Anything in comparison to the willows that we just saw that were 2 meters high in some cases. Distance I paddled out of the fjord, the wind was in my face the entire way, about 10 to 15 knots. I just kept paddling until I got farther out away from those mosquitoes and all that heat. I had a wonderful journey that particular year, 1993, looking down in that fjord, Laksefjord, at the forest or Orpit. Nowhere else in Greenland is there this same phenomena of trees that are growing 2 meters tall.